Welcome to the latest WGSN Hangout. Today we're live from our hub here in London. We are joined by a fine calibre of panellists to discuss the importance of digital for today's designers and retailers. Our guests here today are Sheena Sauvaire, Chief Marketing Officer of Topshop, Clara Mercer, Head of Marketing at the British Fashion Council, and our very own Rachel Arthur, Senior Editor of Digital at WGSN. My name's Elle Hankinson, and I will be hosting today's panel. A little bit of housekeeping. So our social channels are open. Please feel free to comment. We want to hear what you have to say. So please use the hashtag WGSN Hangout. And there's also WGSN Hub if you want to look at where we are and talk about where we are. So thank you so much for joining me here today, this afternoon. I know it's a really busy time for everyone.
That's okay, you're welcome.
So let's begin the conversation by looking at the importance of digital for the fashion industry. Clara, I know this is a big subject for the BFC, something that you're championing, in fact. Digital innovation is one of the BFC's 5 strategic pillars.
That's right.
And the theme of London Fashion Week this season. Can you tell us a bit more about that and the importance of it?
So we've built our 5 strategic pillars really just to help designer businesses and make sure that London is at the forefront in the fashion industry, that it's the biggest global capital. Digital has always been a big part of our strategy, and really this season we're highlighting what the designers are doing, how much it can help both their global reach, also how it can really help with sales. It's a good way to be creative. You can be creative through digital, and it's also really just about telling that story. So what is the story that they can tell? A lot of the work we've been doing is around business support. So Topshop have been a partner of ours for many years from a business support point of view, and it's adding another layer to that. So we help designers get online, whether that's just social media or right through to building e-commerce sites to really help them build their global presence.
And I think that's a really important first point as well, is that we are talking that whole breadth of digital now. You know, digital isn't necessarily purely social. We're talking about e-commerce. We're talking about across the board.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Sheena, I mean, obviously Topshop being a brand that has long been within, and perhaps, you know, definitely a leader within the digital realm, how important do you think it is for fashion brands to work with digital?
I think it's incredibly important. I think for us, in terms of our digital strategy, it's really been at the heart of what our mantra has always been, which is to democratize fashion. So for us, it's about making fashion accessible, and digital gives the perfect tools for us to do that. So it enables us to connect with our audiences, to engage with them, to create content, to create experience and aspiration. And by doing that, we're actually creating brand loyalty. And I think that's the thing at the moment for retail brands. It's such a cluttered marketplace. So it's important for us to always differentiate. And it's by doing activity like we've been doing through Fashion Week, it really gives us the opportunity to stand out. And for us as well, as we're a growing fashion brand globally, digital provides the perfect tool for us to do that, to reach our audiences in 40 countries.
Absolutely. And global being the key word.
Absolutely.
And also in terms of partners, you know, in terms of fashion brands partnering with tech companies, how important do you think that is, and how important do you think that selection is?
I actually think it's very symbiotic. I think initially you think fashion and tech feels like a very ill-suited partnership, and you know, there's been lots of criticism that fashion has been sort of fashionably late to technology, but actually, you know, as you know, we see this season, it's been very symbiotic. And for us, you know, as I said, it's a real opportunity for us to connect our audiences, to really get to the heart of the customer and ultimately entertain the customer. As soon as she's entertained, she's going to be more engaged and she's going to be shopping more. So I think fashion has always had a history of experimenting, and I think we're now in this place with, you know, digital and innovation where we're experimenting more, but actually now getting to the customer and the person that's actually shopping.
Fantastic. And if you were to, you know, speaking about experiences, you know, strategies and actions that Topshop has taken and activated in the past, can you tell us a bit about some of those? Because I know that for some people watching, this idea of digital innovation might be, it's a huge concept and it might be a new topic.
Yeah, for us it's always been, I mean, we've been showing at Fashion Week on schedule since 2005, and for us it's really about how do we globalize that event and how do we create entertainment around it. So for our partnerships, we've always looked at, you know, what is the future of the fashion show, because for us I think that's what people want to know. How are we as Topshop challenging that? The format of a fashion show has always been, you know, straight up and down as a static runway show, very exclusive. It's only the fashion press and buyers that are invited. So for us it was really exploring how can we use technology as a tool or as a partnership for us to really look at how fashion shows should be presented. And if I take this season, for example, if we look at Facebook, the choice of working with Facebook was really around the fact that we can connect audiences globally. As I said, we have, stores in 40 countries, and the way that we've spoken to them about London Fashion Week, to them it felt very London-centric. It didn't feel very relevant to their audience because we couldn't really speak to them. So for us, the partnership with Facebook was, first of all, how do we connect with our audiences globally and create really personal experiences? Then taking the brave and the dynamic step of obviously then showing pieces from the collection on Facebook before they hit the runway. That again was us saying, we're going to put the consumer as centre stage of this campaign and really bring them into the experience. So hence why we chose Facebook for that. The other part of the social catwalk, as we've been calling it this season, has been through a partnership with Instagram. And Instagram, again, we chose that platform because Instagram is very visual, it's very creative, it's a great way to tell stories. So we invited 5 top Instagrammers to come to our space to take really prime positions within the show, in the photographer's pit, backstage, front row, and to really tell the story of Fashion Week and curate it through their eyes. That content then went straight to our window in Oxford Street, which is our global flagship. So people around the world could see those images, and people around the world could participate in Fashion Week. So again, it's really truly making it, something that people can participate in and no longer looking at it as an industry event that exists in London.
I think it's definitely true. I mean, the way that we behave at Fashion Week, our Fashion Weeks have changed in the past kind of 2 years. The event as a whole has changed so dramatically, and the people who attend those events.
Yeah, totally.
I feel as though almost everyone I know has been to a fashion show, which is kind of bizarre because I definitely haven't been to the trade shows of their industry. I think it's really interesting that it is now essentially a public event.
I think they can access all of the content that's created from it. So what it is a great opportunity for not only the brands to get the images, get the video footage, but also now they can interact with that on a day-to-day basis through live streaming, through online, through social media, and so it's everybody's event really. We certainly try and make sure that the whole of London's involved. So from activity on the Tube network that we do with Experian Media, so giving highlights to the Tube, through to branding in stores. We've got flags all the way down Oxford Street, so it really is kind of a festival of fashion and trying to get the whole industry involved. And it's also because it's for the consumer. Nowadays, more than ever, they're driving all of those sales and driving that activity.
Yeah, I think also in terms of live stream, there is this concept of real-time runway as well. Everyone wants to really experience Fashion Week, but they also don't really necessarily want to get the product whether it's 6 months down the line or whatever the timeline. So I think just celebrating fashion generally, not all customers will be able to say which shows they're looking at, but there is a celebration of fashion, which ultimately for a retailer is a celebration of apparel and getting people into stores and shopping.
And to your point earlier, it's also that global reach that it has. So we reached kind of 190 different countries throughout Fashion Week, which is amazing to think that our island is able to make that much noise.
Yeah,
which
totally.
is really exciting.
And Rachel, in terms of other brands making noise, I know that there are a lot of retailers and brands within this space. Can you tell us a bit about previous activations?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's some incredible stuff happening in London, but we've just been in New York too, and from a social perspective, there's some really great things, and actually they very much marry to the same kind of trends that we're seeing come out of Topshop. So that idea of influencers, for instance, with Instagram, we've seen a lot of that happening in New York. Tommy Hilfiger's perfect example. They did something very similar I think they called it their first timers campaign. So rather than bringing people in from the industry, they brought them in from different industries. So there was someone from architecture, there was somebody who was an artist, a photographer, and so forth, who were digital influencers in their own right within their industries, but not necessarily within fashion. So they were brought along to the show for the first time, and similarly, we're pushing out content, I believe actually across a myriad of channels. And so that same kind of idea, sort of giving people more access, but maybe through a slightly different viewpoint as well, which is really lovely. And also, I think one of the things that's been particularly interesting this season has been a real, and this is maybe where the more experimental side of things is coming in a little bit, has been a real push towards social commerce, or at least trying that out for size as such. So we saw that a bit in New York. We saw BCBG using Like to Know It, which is a sort of third-party tool tied to Instagram, so you can essentially shop the look straight away. And actually, that was also tied to an influencer strategy. So it was with a certain number of bloggers who were and celebrities who were at the show wearing certain looks, and then you could comment and get an email and then be able to go and buy it. It's a little bit of a clunky process, but that idea of trying to push social to that consumer, but also then make them purchase too. And also we've seen that with Burberry this week in the US, particularly trying out the Twitter buy button, and that again being to make people buy straight away. And what I love about that example is that it was with nail polish. So it's that realization really that for Topshop, that the consumer that you're reaching is the consumer that would buy your product straight away. For Burberry, it's a very different consumer online, and so using beauty as the entry point is very smart and very clever.
We also tested something for this season as well, which was social curated stores in all of our flagships. So essentially what we were doing was working with our VM teams, and they were looking at what was trending on Facebook and Instagram in terms of trends, and then from a real-time perspective, changing the VM of the product. So whatever people were wearing in the front row, or whatever people were wearing, backstage. And again, this is a really great way of getting global audiences involved in it. And also,
it's a brave move.
It's a very brave move, and it's also, again, putting the customer first. Really influencing VM, influencing retail.
And I think already we've talked about a lot of ideas. How much is this about experimentation as well as through innovation? I'm really intrigued to know, is it about, I don't want to put it as crudely as having a go, but there are a lot of brands doing a lot of different things, and it might not be continuous season after season. How important is this idea of experimentation?
I think it's very important, because I don't think you're going to get it perfectly right straight away. So I think what we've seen in past seasons, and even with ourselves, we're experimenting a bit, but I think fundamentally what we also need to look at is then within that space, what are the partnerships that we can extend, so again they start to feel relevant across all of our campaigns. I think again with some of the smaller designers as well, they've been experimenting a lot this season.
Yeah, there's lots of them have been trying to, whether it's Instagram for the first time or using Facebook, it's for them, they're much smaller brands, they don't have big teams in place, but it's what can they do with the resource that they have, and how can they access this audience. And it's really about storytelling. So whether you are doing something like Click to Buy, which is very advanced, it's more to the basics about telling your brand story online. How can you really get people to engage in that brand? And at a basic level, that's what we're trying to encourage, that they use new platforms to do that. And I think the big message that Peter Fitzgerald, who's from Google, he's our head of our innovation pillar, his big message is that put your feet in first, have a go. If it doesn't work, you can change it. The digital world, not like the print world, you can change it constantly, you can change your mind and keep experimenting, which is quite so exciting.
And I think you have to be nimble and agile as well. I don't think it's not a medium that you can pre-plan, many months in advance. So I think there's always going to be experimentation.
And yet it's something that we're saying now is very much within the wider business strategy. They're not kind of separate.
I think it's completely integral to your communication strategy, and it has to be. It can't be thought of as a separate thing. It has to be a fundamental part of your day-to-day job. What you're doing has to be part of your plan. Otherwise, it won't work. It has to be fundamentals.
I think with all of it, there is a bit of a balance to be had, though, and not to play devil's advocate, but what we're talking about is largely that kind of very fundamental level, and particularly as we're saying with the younger designers, and really getting that base right in terms of social. But obviously the other side of Fashion Week is this big innovation piece that we see, these these certain campaigns that go out there, and some of them are very well thought out and they're very successful as a result, and then there's those other pieces that are the big PR stunt, and then I think that's a very different conversation around digital and around innovation and what the value of that is for a designer or not. And I mentioned this one quite frequently, but I think Fendi drones is probably a really great example. And for those that didn't see it last season, Fendi in Milan put drones down the runway to film the show and then live stream that back to their audience. And it was genius in terms of timing, because it happened straight after Amazon had announced they were using drones or experimenting with drones potentially for deliveries. And actually, I'd also argue that from a PR stunt, it was very clever too, because obviously it got so much coverage absolutely everywhere. And actually,
a season later, we're still talking about it.
And that's the point. But can you remember what the collection was? No. Not necessarily. And that's kind of the thing. It's very interesting that, you know, that for them, you would never associate Fendi with innovation, I think, and it's almost put them on a map in some ways. But does it matter to the Fendi customer? But at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure.
But I think that was just another way to tell their story. That was another story, another angle they were giving to a collection, another route through it. I know that Burberry did something similar yesterday. They were giving people the choice to take different routes through the collection and different viewpoints. And it's all about building the depth and the history behind the brand and what's going on.
And it's also about engaging with new audiences, because there is a die-hard, fast Fendi customer, but probably isn't engaging with it. But I think, in terms of future-proofing for the future customer, it's important.
Yeah, and I mean that's ultimately what Burberry's done very successfully, hasn't it? Made themselves very aspirational in the market at a time when they weren't at all.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, you're right, from Fendi's point of view, that's almost my point, it's put them on the map in some ways, even if actually it's somewhat irrelevant perhaps to the current customer.
I think it's also really relevant because fashion is obviously an incredibly creative, very innovative world in itself. People are inventing new collections and new creative ideas every 6 months at the minimum. So really you need other ways to tell those stories as well. So it works quite well when you're using innovation and digital to do that. You get to innovate on both levels, which I think is why it works as a partnership.
I think also as the converse, designers are becoming inspired by, what they're seeing on Instagram. So it's another route for them to, really feed into their creativity. So I think on the one hand, it's for the brand. And then if you look at it from a design process perspective, it's also engaging them and giving them inspiration for collections.
Exactly. Richard Nicol had that amazing LED dress, which was fantastic, which we haven't seen before. And it's not brand new technology, but the way that he executed it was so beautiful. And then obviously you've got the iPhone watch, which has obviously come out, and everyone from New York Fashion Week went straight up to go and see it, which is the first time that's happened. So I think it's certainly a space that's not going away. It's interesting to see what's going to happen.
Well, that raises a really interesting point to kind of sort of semi-reference wearables there. And I know you're probably going to bring that up too, but
I wouldn't let you get away without asking about wearables, Rachel.
But this is kind of the thing, what we're talking about in this innovation space, and I think there's a phrase that's very often used in the industry at the moment, that's tech for tech's sake, and there's a lot of people that get very frustrated by the idea of brands just doing something purely for the sake of it. And I feel like wearables is maybe slightly sat in that realm. It's not necessarily that it's completely on brand, but it's a brand partnership. It's not actually necessarily innovation.
It's tech people creating fashion is not really where it should be. It should be fashion people using technology to create brilliant designs and brilliant fashion.
Which I agree, Richard Nicol definitely has done. But I'm not sure in New York that was overly the case.
And I think that people are really struggling to find that balance. I mean, it's going to happen. And there are some very interesting people in very important positions who are prepared to do it. So
I think the thing with wearables as well, it needs to feel stylish. I think at the moment there's nothing that looks like it's coming from the fashion language, and I think that's ultimately where you can win, is if you've got something that actually people want to wear and use. So it's the utility versus fashion together.
It has to be the fashion first thing.
I think so, and I think it's interesting that there is that experimentation there, though. The fact that brands are getting involved sort of speaks to the fact that that is where we will move. And it's early days for wearables, it's the first versions of them, and they are still very clunky. It's still very obvious they're a piece of technology. They're not as beautiful as they've perhaps been promised to be before they've been released, but I think it's early, that I think within the next few years we will start to see the fashion industry much more integrated, and things like the Richard Nicol dress just being about enhancing really beautiful designs.
But I think I remember even perhaps 3 years ago going to see a Richard Nicol collection, and already he was trying to incorporate tech. I think
it was
can't
a bag.
remember.
They had
Yeah,
a bag.
Yes, that was a
Vodafone?
Vodafone. It had a charger in it.
So Vodafone, who are our principal sponsor, they did a bag with him and it had a phone charger in it. So it's been happening for quite a long time. And again, it's not really about technology, it's about innovation and design and creativity and how you can use technology to enhance that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting angle as well. It's saying it is about the design, fundamentally bringing it back to the design process. And certainly, you know, there are so many designers who are experimenting within this space. There's certainly an eagerness for it. People, what we may not be there yet, but there's certainly people want to make that happen and want to make it more cohesive and more.
It's pushing boundaries, isn't it? It's being the most creative. It's you know setting your sights beyond where it is now and what you can get out of that in the future.
I'd almost argue though that at this point a lot of what we've seen, and I am speaking more to New York actually with the wearable stuff, is that the concept is pushing boundaries, but the designs aren't.
No.
And actually, what's been put out there is that big press stunt thing. You know, it's lots of back brands jumping on the same bandwagon, which is that, you know, wearables are there, and suddenly there's, you know, another tech company who's saying, you know, we've got this wearable, can you do something with that? And it's stuck on a leather cuff and things like that, and it's just not that exciting.
And I think to your point earlier, that's that experimentation piece. So from all of this, the learnings will come through and will inevitably be a part of your design team's kind of brief.
But I remember that's even when, you know, multi-channel e-commerce platforms set up, you know, so I think there's always going to be the learning curves, and then you get to where you need to get to in terms of the proposition.
I also think there's a little bit of that thing of like brands wanting to have that association with innovation because it does really help them out. You know, Burberry set that curve, and Topshop did too, in terms of where brands should try and position themselves and how well it's done for them. And I feel like wearables is maybe the next run of that. You know, it's moved away from just doing something on social to doing something that's more tech-led, and it's with a technology company. And it's to be able to say, you know, we've done something innovative, and so it ticks that box in a lot of ways, but also does then come into the minds of consumers, as we were saying earlier. You know, brings an awareness to a certain level of consumer, and you know, the wearable thing is kind of wholeheartedly tied to social, just in terms of the way that it's shared and so forth.
And actually, you know, I think it's interesting to see that it's the first point we've actually talked about ROI in this conversation. You know, I think it's interesting that we want to be able to ground it, but perhaps this level of innovation perhaps is not yet grounded in return. But I don't know, it's an interesting point, I think, one that I'd like to come back to. I just wanted to move back to the kind of campaigns idea, actually. So away from the product and back to the kind of branding and advertising. You know, I'm really interested to know, Sheena, in terms of, well, on the basis of long-term ROI, how do you make your Fashion Week campaign stretch over a full season? Because obviously there are big activations happening now, but there's a whole season to fill.
I mean, there's a lot of content that we capture over Fashion Week. So really it's about using that content and peppering it through for all of our product stories. So, you know, the content that we get backstage is great content to then serve up when we're talking about a beauty feature. Equally, what people are wearing front row, we can really dissect all of those shoppable trends that we can then commercialize online and in store to then, you know, sell product that's available to buy throughout the season. The same as well in terms of, you know, globally what people are wearing to different fashion weeks. So it's not just London, we would also do that in New York, we would also do that in Milan and Paris. So for us it's really looking at all the great content that we capture, then dissecting it, then putting a content strategy together, looking at the products that we have available to buy, and also being very predictive in trends. You know, it's a great place for us to say, you know, whether it's frayed denim or whatever the thing is, to start predicting what should be the things that we should be pushing product wise and talking about. So that can extend, you know, in terms of the content that we've got right now, that can extend all the way through to January.
And actually I think that's a really interesting point as well. It's about using this time to amass information and catalogue all of that. That's really interesting. So we're talking about what brands are pushing out, but it's also about what you're taking from that.
And it's doing it on an ongoing basis, because if you look at traditional media, say, you know, a supplement, a catwalk supplement, which would typically come out in August or September, which is talking about the season, the next supplement would come out in, say, February or January. What we're doing is really taking that content and drip feeding it through for 6 months, and really, as I said, commercializing those stories, so inspiring the customer around that product and really getting them to sort of think around the inspiration around it. And then obviously that's the more content you serve up, we've got stats to show that it drives purchase.
And also and correct me if I'm wrong, Sheena, when people are looking at your site, you know what they're interested in.
Absolutely.
You're beginning to learn that, and then you can feed them different things. So
Yeah,
you're constantly reacting to them through data. And Fashion Week just allows you to get that content.
And it's a prime place for us, even through, we see it even through our live stream. We see the sales of beauty, shoot up, because there's a real live experience which is, wrapped around a dream, where customers understand how to style, different beauty trends, and things fly off the shelf during that period. So from that perspective, I think it really builds a strong case for ROI.
Similarly, we collect content throughout Fashion Week, which is, we have 5 days of it, so we have buckets of the stuff, and then throughout the rest of the year, that's how we tell our stories. That's how you speak to your different audiences, whether it's buyers, press, investors, consumers. That's how we kind of carve it all up.
It's interesting because I think, obviously we're talking from a level of a brand that's, very established at doing that kind of thing, and I feel like, that word content is second nature to you, and as it is to a lot of other big businesses, but that's still very new for many. And that idea of a pre, during and post strategy for Fashion Week is still very it's still very new. There's a lot of people that go in, they do the fashion show, and obviously it's then about getting the collection to store, but there isn't something marketing wise that ties that 6 months, and that's why there's still that big worry that you have the show and then everyone's forgotten about the collection when it actually comes to stores. And it's, how do you tie that together? And obviously content being a brilliant way to do it, but I don't think we see that wholeheartedly across the industry.
We did a workshop at Google the week before Fashion Week, which was for any brand that wanted to come. So their social media guys would come along, and it was about exactly that. So what are you collecting from your show? What are you doing with it? How are you telling that story afterwards? What do you need to collect while you're doing it? Because obviously the images go to style.com, they go online, they get churned out, but beyond that they can use it for themselves. And I think that everybody is gradually building up a bank of content that they can use, and it also affects their sales. People like Monica Trans, who does a brilliant job at kind of telling the stories, and now has a fantastic e-commerce platform and uses that stuff throughout the year. So it's kind of becoming second nature, but it's an education thing.
It is,
We're constantly building that.
Can we just give some, because our previous Hangout was all about how to make it as an emerging designer, and talking about if there are people from smaller brands watching, are there any tips or advice for how to start within this? Because I think exactly as you say, it's easy to see that there could be a gap there that seems
quite hard. We just tried to pull together a series of toolkits. So we created what's known as an e-commerce pyramid, which is kind of your stage by stage steps. So start with register your domain, then collect emails, then which platforms, which social platform are you going to start engaging with, and then building up to an international e-commerce brand. And within that there are various toolkits, whether it's what is SEO, the more basic things which even we all find difficult at times, and there's answers for all of this out there, so it curates all that stuff together. So if you go to the BSC website, then that's where you find that information, which is useful. And it's constantly changing, so we're trying to kind of build on it all the time.
And I think exactly as you say, we're saying this is something that is constantly changing, and therefore we have to adapt.
The way that we keep it relevant is that we have relationships with Facebook, Twitter, Google, with the people at the very top, so that they are beginning to understand the breadth of the industry and how many different brands there are within it, and what the different solutions are for each, so we can constantly keep that moving.
I mean, for me, just in terms of just general tips, as you said, I think the main thing for younger or emerging designers to really be aware of is that that they as a personality are that brand, and so using social is just about getting stuck in, really. It's about posting on Instagram and everything else, and just doing it, just finding your feet and just rolling with it. And as you mentioned earlier, not being really afraid of the fact that if it doesn't really work, it's fine, you can just stop doing it or close it down and move on to the next one. And it's that kind of having that flow, to be flexible. And we were talking about this the other day, the idea of new platforms and which ones do you go for and which ones don't you know. I mean, I would love your view on that, but I think from a young designer perspective, I'm almost a bit like, just give it a go. If it works for you, great.
Really,
I think that
they're get out onto them.
But I would also caveat that with, you have to think about your resource. Their biggest challenge is resource. So if images is what they're good at, then Instagram's the right platform for you. If they like doing mood boards, then go to Pinterest. But it has to fit into their daily routine. It can't be a hassle. They can't overcommit. Because they don't have teams of people to do it. So it's what they can manage and resource, because it's a commitment.
But I would also say, I mean, I think we actually did have this in the panel we did the other day with Simon Collins from Parsons, and he was saying, as a young designer, or actually anybody in the industry, I'd say the same thing to journalists, like, you are that personality. So yes, you don't have resource, but everybody can spare 10 minutes to write a couple of tweets a day, and that just starts building, or do a couple of Instagram posts, something that starts building your brand. Even, I'm talking at the very early stages, just so that you have a presence in a digital sense, like, to take it right back to the beginning. Obviously resource is a massive issue, but that slow takeover, I think, is definitely possible.
And I think it's also not to overthink it, because the designers are such visual people, so if they are going to capture an image, they want it to be of a certain level. And I think the great thing about social is that it doesn't have to be at that level, and it can be a lot more intuitive, it can be a lot more organic. And I think not to overthink it, I think, would also be one of my tips for sure.
I think it's really refreshing as somebody who doesn't work within this space so much. I think it's really exciting that we're saying, do it, get onto these platforms, try these things. I think it's,
and be realistic, just get on with it and make sure you can manage it.
Fantastic. And to move into the future, as we've talked about, it's something that is changing. This digital social is changing so rapidly. Season on season, we're seeing so many different activations for different brand levels. Where would you like to see it moving? I know obviously for the BFC it's a very important topic.
I think really it's just using, there's many different angles. One is around e-commerce and business, so it's about helping brands to build their businesses through e-commerce and being smart with it. And the other one is around the future of the fashion show, like what can be done in that space, what can we do to make the lives of the public at home, consumers, and also buyers and press, what can we do with those shows to make it easier, make the experience richer, and also to make it more global, to make London Fashion Week go even further. The aim of the game.
I think I've got a couple of things. For me, one of the things I'm really excited about at the moment is kind of where is social going next, and I think I say that because at WGSN, when we've been reporting on it, we have clients asking us all the time, or the question always used to be, what's the next Facebook? Like, how do I become big on this next channel? And actually that's really shifted, and it's become, how do I become really good at this specific channel? And that's really interesting. It's sort of that real bedding in process on these different platforms, and now really working out how to do it. And some of the great examples we've seen is just really nailing that really visual identity. And I think Michael Kors is another great brand that does that really, really well. Just very beautiful images that are so on brand, you kind of don't even need to necessarily see that it says Michael Kors, and you know that it's that kind of jet set lifestyle. It's particularly on Instagram very well set, and also that tone of voice thing as well. And I think you guys at Topshop do that very well. But it's really fun if you start looking at, and actually this is a great point for emerging designers as well, like, what is your tone of voice? If you're someone like a Henry Holland, you've got a very different tone of voice to someone like a Michael Kors, for instance. And I gave this example on another event recently, which was a brand called Chubbies in the US, and this is a men's shorts brand, and it's
Rachel, it's 5 o'clock.
It's brilliant. It's great because their tone of voice is just so absolutely on the mark for the kind of consumer they're trying to hit, which is that real American bro kind of, at university in a fraternity, and they've got this great tagline, which is "Skies out, thighs out," and that kind of just it's brilliant. It's hilarious, and it just feeds through all their messaging. And you check out all their email marketing, you check out their social, you check out their website, and so that sort of thing, like starting to use social in a way that's just very much, as we were saying earlier, like a part of your brand, and not just this add-on that you've got as well.
I think another brand that does it brilliantly is Anya High-March, in terms of her storytelling and taking that something with a sense of humour and rolling it out across the whole campaign, whether it is a milk float that's delivering Frosties to our offices, right through to her social media channel. It's been really clever.
I actually think Kate Spade does a great job as well. She does a really good job of setting out a strategy for each platform, and for her, the way that she looks at Instagram is just the life of a Kate Spade girl, the lifestyle of a Kate outfits they go, as opposed to just serving up product images of bags or shoes. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at
Kate's connection to the retail space as well. They did a lot of stuff in shop windows, which I think was really smart, to constantly bring it back to store.
And it's fantastically consistent, and I think that's the great thing about it as well.
Consistent, but I like the idea of there being a different message for different channels. And realizing that the person that's on Pinterest isn't necessarily the same person that's your follower on Instagram, and how you don't therefore need to put necessarily this exact same thing out. Like, how do you tackle that slightly
I would actually say that you really shouldn't put the same thing out. Like, it's a very different audience, it's a very different platform, and you have to treat each one as a different type of media.
But she is taking it back to the physical, which is the thing that I like the consistency for, is it's completely multi-channel.
And grounding it, as you say, in store.
Yeah, and none of these things are going to replace the others. So you need wholesale, you need e-commerce, you need bricks and mortar, you need the whole experience, including social. And what it will do is be a brilliant brand building tool to give your consumers many touch points, and that's sort of what I think we're seeing happening.
And hopefully create brand loyalty. This is all about creating engagement and loyalty, and give you a really clear point of view in the marketplace. I think that's got to be the goal of any retailer right now, where it is such a global high street.
Yeah.
I think the other point of view from the future side of things, talking about digital, that we haven't really touched on, and I'm really fascinated by it at the moment, is the idea of Fashion Week and trans-seasonal collections. And I mean, not to do your job and ask Sheena a question, but I'm really intrigued by the idea of, you've created a collection and you're able to put 6 items into store on the same day, and what that says about the seasons of fashion now and how that all fits together.
Well, I think, we were talking about it earlier. We can see, the great thing is when we execute these campaigns, we see the data, we see the behavior, and where before we've had click to buy, what was happening, we had people that were signing up and they wanted to be notified when the collection was hitting 6 weeks, 8 weeks. But even that wasn't quick enough, because we saw that there was a bit of a dropout rate by the time it got to the point when the product was available to buy. So there we thought, actually, this just isn't happening quick enough. So what we decided to do was really bring it from the moment that, the girls are, off finale and have finished the show. It's available to buy in our flagship, and it's available to buy online. And again, I think it really does throw up the fashion seasons, as you said. And I think, in some ways, high street, we wanted to say high street, has always been quick seasonal drops of product. And it's very interesting right now, because luxury brands are really looking to the high street, whereas always it's been the high streets looking to the luxury, around those drops of product, and how you can be much more sort of trans-seasonal, if you like, because that's the other thing around, what kills every retailer is the weather. So, I think just by the fact that, there's many different collections that are coming through now, which are really about looking at, I know it's July, I know the sun's out, but actually there's a customer that's hungry for newness, that's hungry for new styles, and really looking at how you blend it.
It's the customer they're driving it. So the reason the luxury brands are also having to change and adapt is that the customer wants things now, they want it quickly. And you're seeing a massive increase in pre-collections, which is now a huge market, and lots of retailers, like the high street, are reacting to their customers. If they want drops more quickly, then the designers are going to have to adapt to that.
And I think it's also just the way they're searching out information. Obviously, with the growth of mobile, we see it where customers are literally just coming in, having seen something, then they want it now. So it even goes back to even long lead advertising, images that are in your store, unless the product's there and there that they can buy it, they're gone. They feel disappointed. Absolutely.
But that doesn't necessarily equate to brand loyalty. There's still, I'm asking, is that because there's so much there and there's so much to tempt them, if it's not available that minute, are we loyal to brands in the same way, is what I'm asking.
I think you are, but it's also about what's in the top of your inbox at any given point. So it's kind of what you're seeing first. So to your point, if you see it now, you kind of expect to be able to get it, because that's the world that we live in. So I think that's what people are reacting to.
And I think you're consuming information and consuming, if it's not available there and then, you'll go on to the next thing. And it's up to a brand to really ensure that that consumer journey is strong, so that you're always consistently serving up products. So when it isn't, they know about it.
And I think we are more fickle than we used to be, probably because there is so much choice, and our brains are so fast, and we're bombarded by information constantly, that you make much more spirited decisions, I think.
I think it's why I'm so excited about the idea of social commerce, which, you know, I mean, in some ways it's a terrible phrase because it's had negative connotations by the fact that it didn't really work when it first started. But I feel like there is this space for potential, and, you know, it's partly reliant on the brands and the retailers to be able to fulfill it, but also to have the tools in the first place to be able to push that out, because as we said, you know, there really is the consumer desire there to see something and click to buy, which is why we've had, you know, the likes of ASOS and Net-a-Porter doing so well with their editorial policy tied through to actually be able to shop the looks there and then.
Because everyone's on their mobile, they want to be able to do it immediately, not with multiple screens, and they need to be able to get it.
And in one click.
It's definitely happening. There's no doubt about it.
And how is that affecting the collections? You know, to go back to Burberry, that was a very winter-heavy collection. There was goat fur and mink and shearling and denim, and, you know.
I think you've actually seen that a lot this week across all the collections, and I think it's because people are selling globally to lots of different climates, and they're having to be slightly more transient so that they've got an offer being independent of the weather. It's trans-season. I think that's what it is. And a lot of pre-collections are then, you know, you're seeing a run-on from them in the actual collections, which is obviously slightly mid-season as well.
Fantastic. And I think we are actually running out of time now, so if I could just wrap up with some tips. Let's get the absolute most of having you here today. If we broached this before, but any kind of actionable tips for designers, retailers, for on digital platforms, something that's accessible, perhaps those who are more established, but equally somebody who's just starting out. So whether, I think your point, Rachel, about, you know, also paying attention to your tone of voice is really interesting. It's like a very
that's what I
fundamental point, but you can't ignore it.
I think mine would be listen to your customer. I would be listen to what they're doing and react to that, and just give it a go. You know, put your both feet in first.
I would also say that I think, you know, with all these channels, we've got so much data at our hands. So I think without getting too entrenched in data, I think, you know, we have the ability to now really look at what the customer wants and really track it, but also getting a balance with being very agile and still having, you know, this element of instinct, because I think there is a danger when you have so much data is that you can lose sight of, you know, what actually feels real as well. So get a balance of both.
I think balance is the key word for me as well, in a slightly different way, and that's, you know, this idea of innovation that we've talked about. I fundamentally believe that, you know, brands should absolutely go for it, but if you're going to balance that with it being on brand for you, you know, don't do something that's so totally abstract that it feels very fake and, you know, purely as a PR stunt. Even if it does help you propel slightly forward, you know, in the long run it needs to fit with what your ethos is.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much. Sheena, Clara, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today. We will be responding to comments that have used the WGSN Hangout hashtag. So please send anything you are interested in or want to know more about to us, and we will do our best to get back to them. But until then, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.